My DIL spat in my face for asking her not to yell at my grandson, so I took back the house and gave her 5 days to leave. The saliva slid down my wrinkled cheek in slow motion. The dining room went silent, the only sound my grandson Noah's muffled sob as he watched his mother, my daughter-in-law, spit in my face. "How dare you undermine me in my own house?" Amber hissed, her manicured finger pointing at my chest. My arthritic hands trembled as I dabbed at my cheek with a napkin. All I had done was gently suggest she not yell at Noah for spilling his juice. Such a small thing to trigger such humiliation. "Amber, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. My son Thomas stared at his plate, avoiding my eyes. "Let's not start another argument," he muttered, as if I had been the one to escalate the situation. Nobody defended me. Nobody ever did anymore. I looked at my grandson's terrified face and felt something crack inside me. 3 years I'd endured this, 3 years since my heart attack, when Thomas and Amber moved into my home under the guise of taking care of me. 3 years of watching my independence slip away, along with control of my finances, my home, and my dignity. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, the words bitter on my tongue. Words I'd repeated countless times since they'd taken over my life. "You should be," Amber said, sitting back down and roughly wiping Noah's face. "Clean up your mess, Noah. Maybe Grandma will learn from your example." I excused myself, legs shaking as I retreated to what used to be my sewing room, now converted to a cramped bedroom where I was expected to stay out of sight. I caught my reflection in the small mirror by the door. The woman staring back at me looked defeated, shrunken, a stranger. This wasn't the first indignity, but something about being spit on, literally spit on, in the house I'd owned for 40 years, in front of my grandson, broke something fundamental inside me. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped in my lap, and made a decision. I wouldn't die like this, powerless, humiliated, a prisoner in my own home. I had spent my life being reasonable, accommodating, understanding. Where had it gotten me? The woman who raised 2 children alone after Edward's death, who managed household finances and taught mathematics to generations of students, was still in here somewhere. I just needed to find her. I heard Noah's soft knock at my door. "Grandma?" he whispered. "Are you okay?" I wiped my eyes quickly. "Come in, sweetheart." His small face appeared, eyes still red from crying. "I'm sorry Mom was mean to you." I pulled him close, smelling his clean hair. "It's not your fault, Noah. Not at all. Dad says we have to be patient with you because you're old and sick," he said innocently. I froze, then carefully asked, "What else does your dad say about me?" Noah looked down. "That soon you'll go to a special place where people will take better care of you than we can." In that moment, with my grandson's innocent revelation, I knew. This wasn't just unkindness. This was calculated, and I had to fight back before it was too late. The 2-story colonial in Westfield, Massachusetts that Edward and I bought as newlyweds no longer felt like mine. My oil paintings had been replaced with Amber's modern prints. My books were boxed up in the basement because they collected dust. Even my bedroom, the master suite where Edward and I had spent 40 years, now belonged to Thomas and Amber. While I was relegated to the tiny guest room downstairs, I limped past what used to be my garden, now neglected, toward the kitchen. My hip ached from sleeping on the too soft mattress they'd purchased without consulting me. "Mom, you're up early," Thomas said, not looking up from his phone. He was dressed for work, expensive watch glinting on his wrist, a watch I'd never seen before. "Remember your pills." "I've been taking my own medication for 15 years, Thomas," I said quietly. "And now you have us to remind you," he replied with that patronizing smile. "We don't want another scare like last month. Last month when Amber found me unconscious, though I have no memory of fainting. Last month when they used that incident to take away my car keys permanently. I'd managed just fine for 12 years after Edward's death. I paid bills on time, kept the house maintained, even took a cruise with my church friends. Everything changed 3 years ago with my heart attack. During my recovery, Thomas offered to help temporarily with paperwork. Medicated and weak, I'd signed a power of attorney I believed was limited. 1 month later, Thomas and Amber sold their condo and moved in to take care of me. Within weeks, they controlled my bank accounts, medical appointments, and social calendar, which quickly dwindled to nothing. "Your oatmeal's getting cold," Amber said, sweeping into the kitchen in her workout clothes. Thomas, did you remind your mother about her pills? They spoke about me as if I weren't there, a habit that had become so common I sometimes wondered if I'd already died. I need to go to the pharmacy today, I said, trying to sound casual. And maybe the library. Amber and Thomas exchanged a look. I'll pick up your prescription, Amber said. It's too cold for you outside. It was 65 degrees. I can take the bus, I insisted. I've been using public transportation since before you were born. And risk another fall? Thomas shook his head. Mom, be reasonable. That's why we're here. What could I say? That I suspected they were stealing from me? That I felt like a prisoner? That I'd heard them discussing memory care facilities when they thought I was asleep? So I nodded and ate my cold oatmeal, feeling the walls closing in further. Later, alone in my room, I examined the bruise on my arm from where Amber had gripped me last week when I tried to answer my own phone. Small indignities piled up like snowflakes, eventually becoming an avalanche that buried the person I used to be. I opened my nightstand drawer, touching the small notebook where I'd begun documenting everything. Dates, incidents, overheard conversations. Not that anyone would believe an old woman with a heart condition over her devoted caretakers, but as I stared at the faded photograph of Edward and me on our 30th anniversary, I made a silent promise I would find a way out, somehow. The house was finally empty. Thomas at work, Amber at her spin class, Noah at school. 3 hours of solitude, a rare gift these days. I moved through the quiet rooms, touching familiar surfaces. My fingers traced the dining table Edward had refinished by hand, now covered with Amber's gaudy placemats. I passed the wall where our family photos once hung, replaced with abstract prints that meant nothing to me. I needed my photo albums, the real ones, not the sanitized digital versions Thomas kept on his computer. I knew they'd been boxed up in the hallway closet. To protect them, Amber had claimed. The step stool wobbled slightly as I reached for the top shelf. My hip protested, but determination pushed me upward. My fingers brushed the cardboard box when my balance shifted. I grabbed the wall to steady myself, pressing against a section of paneling. It moved. I froze, then pressed again. The panel slid sideways, revealing a small recessed compartment, Edward's hidden wall safe. My breath caught. I hadn't forgotten its existence, but Thomas had renovated this hallway 3 years ago, covering the access with new paneling. We're updating, Mom, he'd explained while I was still weak from the hospital. When I'd asked about the safe later, he'd assured me he'd transferred all important documents to his office for better security. My fingers, gnarled with arthritis but suddenly steady, turned the combination, Edward's birthday, then mine. The lock clicked open. Inside lay our original wills, insurance policies, and Edward's investment journal, the meticulous records he'd kept of every financial decision. As I scanned the documents, confusion gave way to disbelief, then to a cold, clarifying anger. According to these papers, I should have a substantial monthly income from Edward's investments and pension. I should own not just this house, but also a small rental property downtown that Edward had purchased as an investment before his death. Yet I lived on a meager allowance that barely covered my medications. I depended entirely on Thomas and Amber, who controlled all my accounts. My hands trembled as I flipped through bank statements. The rental property was still generating income, but the deposits went to an account I didn't recognize. My investment dividends showed regular withdrawals, management fees paid to Thomas's consulting company. The safe also contained a letter from Edward addressed to me, dated the week before his sudden heart attack. Martha, my love, it began. I've arranged everything so you'll never have to worry about money. The house is paid off, the investments are stable, and the downtown property will provide extra income. You'll be secure for the rest of your life. Secure. The word mocked me now. I carefully photographed each document with my old flip phone, the basic one Thomas had given me for emergencies only. Then I returned everything exactly as I'd found it and slid the panel closed. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, heart pounding not from exertion, but from a new emotion cutting through the fog of the past 3 years. Rage. My own son had been systematically stealing from me while isolating me from friends who might have noticed. The small apartment downtown that could have been my escape was generating income that funded their lifestyle. The woman who'd meekly accepted being spit on yesterday was gone. In her place sat someone I hadn't been in years, a fighter. Your blood pressure is concerning, Mrs. Donovan, Dr. Patel said, frowning at his monitor. "Have you been taking your medication regularly?" "Yes," I replied. "My son and his wife make sure of it." Dr. Patel had been my cardiologist for over a decade. He was one of the few people I still saw regularly outside the house. "And how are things at home?" he asked, his dark eyes studying my face. Something in his tone made me look up. In that moment, I made a decision. "May I speak with you privately?" "Doctor?" He nodded, seeming unsurprised. "Of course. Let me ask the nurse to take Thomas to fill out some forms." Once we were alone, words tumbled out. The financial control, the isolation, the daily humiliations. I showed him the photos of the documents I'd found. "Martha," he said quietly when I finished, "what you're describing sounds like elder abuse." Hearing it named so clinically made it more real somehow. "I need to admit you overnight for observation," he said. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and I'm concerned about these episodes you've described." "Thomas won't allow it," I said. "I don't need his permission," Dr. Patel replied firmly. "You're my patient, not him." That night in the hospital was my first taste of freedom in years. Thomas and Amber visited briefly, Thomas playing the concerned son perfectly, telling the nurses about my confusion and forgetfulness. In the room next to mine was Eleanor Winters, a retired attorney recovering from knee surgery. She was sharp, outspoken, and immediately saw through my carefully constructed facade of frailty. "You're not nearly as confused as your son claims," she observed after he left. I hesitated, then confessed everything. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression growing darker. "They're banking on your physical limitations and social isolation," she said finally. "It's textbook financial elder abuse." "I'm not good with computers," I admitted. "Thomas handles everything online." "That's exactly what they count on," Eleanor replied. "But you don't need technology to be smart." "Martha." Before her discharge, Eleanor gave me her card and the contact information for Victoria Chen, her former law partner who specialized in elder rights. "Call her," she insisted. "Your age and health don't mean you've lost the right to control your own life." That night I lay in my hospital bed planning. I needed allies, evidence, time. When Thomas came to take me home the next day, I played the role he expected, the frail mother, grateful for his care. But inside, something had shifted. I began noticing details I'd overlooked, how he always locked his office door, how Amber received packages from expensive stores while claiming my care was a financial burden, how they whispered when they thought I was napping. Using the hidden key I'd kept, a habit from when Edward frequently locked himself out, I waited until they took Noah to a weekend sports tournament to enter Thomas's office. What I found devastated me. The power of attorney I'd signed gave Thomas complete control over my finances, not temporarily as he'd explained. Bank records showed systematic transfers from my accounts to theirs. The downtown apartment was indeed rented out, but the income went straight to Thomas. Most alarming was a printed email between Thomas and a real estate agent discussing selling my house once Mom's situation is resolved. In messages with Amber, he wrote, "Dr. Greenberg agrees that with her heart condition worsening, a care facility would be best. Once she signs over the house, we can finally move forward with our plans." They weren't just stealing from me. They were planning to institutionalize me against my will to take my home. With my heart literally aching in my chest, I began to photograph everything. I wasn't just fighting for my money or my house anymore. I was fighting for my life. "Just a precaution," Dr. Patel told Thomas, patting my hand. "The new medication might affect her blood pressure. 24 hours of monitoring." Thomas frowned. "I don't think that's necessary. We can monitor her at home." "I insist," Dr. Patel said firmly. As her physician, I kept my expression neutral, hiding my relief. Another night of freedom, another opportunity. In the hospital bed beside mine, Eleanor was back for her follow-up. She'd arranged it specifically to coincide with my medication adjustment. No coincidence at all. "Victoria's coming tomorrow," she whispered once we were alone. "She'll meet you here, where Thomas can't interrupt." That night, I met Judith, my friend from church and a retired nurse, in the hospital cafeteria. Thomas had gradually isolated me from my church community, claiming my health made attendance difficult. Judith was one of the few who persistently checked on me despite Amber's obvious annoyance. "I knew something was wrong," Judith said, her face tight with anger as I showed her the evidence I'd gathered. "The way they kept canceling our lunch dates, how you stopped coming to services." "I need your help," I said. "I'm not good with technology," And they watch me constantly. Judith's eyes gleamed. They watch an old woman. They don't watch me. She patted her purse. I've got a tablet with a camera. We'll document everything. The next morning, Victoria Chen arrived, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who reminded me of myself at that age. She reviewed my evidence with a professional detachment that somehow made the situation more manageable. This is textbook elder abuse, she confirmed. Financial exploitation, isolation, emotional abuse, possible medical neglect. Can you help me? I asked. Yes, she said without hesitation. But it will take time and careful planning. They'll fight back when they realize what's happening. I've got nothing but time, I replied with a bitter smile. And they've already taken everything else. Victoria laid out a strategy. Document everything. Secure allies. Build a legal case. And most importantly, pretend nothing had changed. You need to make them think you're more dependent than ever, she explained. The moment they suspect you're fighting back, they'll accelerate their plans. When Thomas came to take me home that afternoon, I played my part perfectly. The confused, grateful mother, too frail to manage on her own. He bought it completely. She's declining faster than I expected, I overheard him tell Amber that night. The hospital stay confused her even more. We should move up our timeline. Their timeline. My deadline. Over the following weeks, I became the actress of a lifetime. I shuffled more, forgot small things intentionally, asked for help with tasks I could easily manage. Thomas and Amber relaxed their vigilance, convinced my mental state was deteriorating. Meanwhile, Judith visited regularly, ostensibly to help with my medications. She brought her tablet, showing me family photos, while actually documenting evidence and recording conversation. She helped me learn to use basic apps that Thomas wouldn't notice, setting up a secure email account on her tablet that I could access during her visits. Victoria worked quietly, investigating the legal documents, gathering financial records, and building a case. She discovered that Thomas had never properly activated the portion of the power of attorney that granted him control over my living arrangements, a crucial oversight. Dr. Patel scheduled regular appointments, creating legitimate reasons for me to leave the house using medical transport services that Thomas couldn't easily monitor. During these appointments, I sometimes met Victoria at her office instead. My prison was still a prison, but now I had a plan. And for the first time in 3 years, I had hope. You're different lately, Noah observed one afternoon as we played cards in my room. You seem sad but also stronger, out of the mouths of babes. I smiled at my grandson, the innocent caught in this web of adult greed and manipulation. Sometimes, Noah, I said carefully, people can be both sad and strong at the same time. That's what growing up teaches you. What it didn't teach me, what I was learning only now at 78, was how to fight back. Your mother needs a care facility, Thomas, Amber said, her voice drifting through the heating vent into my room. We can't keep living like this. After the house sells, Thomas replied. The market's perfect right now. What if she refuses to sign? She's been different lately. She won't refuse, and if she does, we have options. I lay perfectly still, recorder app running on the tablet Judith had slipped me. Another piece of evidence for Victoria's growing file. 2 months into my secret resistance, I'd developed a system. Judith visited 3 times weekly, ostensibly checking my medications, but actually helping document everything. Eleanor connected me with a sympathetic banker at my old branch who provided financial records without alerting Thomas. Victoria built a legal case, while Dr. Patel ensured regular medical appointments that gave me freedom to meet with my growing team of allies. I'd perfected my performance as the increasingly frail, confused mother. I shuffled more, asked simple questions repeatedly, and appeared increasingly dependent on Thomas and Amber, who grew more careless in their conversations around me. This morning, I'd accidentally knocked over my coffee, creating a distraction while Judith photographed banking documents Thomas had carelessly left on the kitchen table. My careful act had an unexpected consequence. It gave me genuine physical strength. The deliberate shuffling had strengthened my leg muscles. The mental focus required to maintain my charade had sharpened my mind. My blood pressure improved as I channeled my anger into purposeful action rather than helpless rage. She's looking worse, don't you think? Amber asked one evening, studying me across the dinner table. I kept my eyes unfocused, my hands slightly trembling as I slowly ate my soup. Definitely, Thomas agreed. Dr. Greenberg has an opening at Sunrise Valley next month. It might be time. 1 month. My timeline had accelerated. That night, I made my riskiest move yet. I called my daughter Rebecca in California. Our relationship had grown distant after Edward's death, her visits rare and calls infrequent. Her demanding architecture career and the pain of seeing the family home without her father kept her away, relying on Thomas's reports about my health. I'd been calling her cell phone for days, but she never answered numbers she didn't recognize. Finally, I left a voicemail. "Rebecca, it's Mom. I'm having chest pains again. Please call." Half-truth. The stress did affect my heart. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. I answered in the bathroom with the shower running. "Mom? What's going on?" Her voice, so like Edward's, brought tears to my eyes. "I don't have much time," I whispered. "I need you to come home. Don't tell Thomas I called. Tell him you're worried because I missed our regular call." "What? Mom, you're scaring me." "Please, Rebecca. I've never asked you for anything like this before. Come home. Tell Thomas it's a surprise visit. I'll explain everything then." After a long pause, she said, "I'll be there tomorrow." I ended the call, hands shaking with relief and terror. This was the linchpin of Victoria's strategy. We needed Rebecca as a witness, an advocate, someone Thomas couldn't easily dismiss. As I returned to my room, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the defeated shell I'd seen months ago. My eyes were clear, my shoulders straighter, despite my deliberate stoop when others were watching. Even my face seemed different, lined with age and worry, yes, but alive with purpose. Thomas and Amber had taken my home, my money, and nearly 3 years of my life. But in fighting to reclaim them, I'd found something I thought was lost forever. Myself. "Rebecca's coming tomorrow," I told Judith during her Wednesday visit, my voice barely above a whisper, despite the radio playing to mask our conversation. "Thank God," Judith replied, adjusting my blood pressure cuff for show. "Victoria says her presence changes everything legally. We discovered through Victoria's investigation that Amber had a history of financial fraud, a lawsuit from her first husband in Nevada that ended in a settlement. This explained their desperate need for my assets and their mounting credit card debt, which Victoria had uncovered through financial records. More disturbing was Thomas's consultation with Dr. Greenberg, a geriatric specialist, seeking an evaluation that might declare me mentally incompetent. The ethical doctor had refused without a comprehensive independent assessment, which Thomas kept postponing. "They're planning to move me to a care facility next month," I told Judith. "Victoria needs to accelerate our timeline." Judith nodded, her eyes fierce with protective anger. At 72, she was younger than me, but had become my most dedicated ally, risking Thomas's wrath to visit regularly. "We're ready," she assured me. "Eleanor's secured all the legal documentation. Victoria has the case prepared, and the banker has proof of financial malfeasance." That night, I lay awake rehearsing what I would tell Rebecca. Our relationship had grown strained over the years. She blamed Thomas's controlling nature, while I'd blamed her absence. The truth, I now realized, was that we'd both been manipulated by Thomas's careful management of information. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. Through my partially open bedroom door, I watched Thomas's genuine shock at seeing his sister on the doorstep. "Rebecca? What are you doing here?" "Surprising Mom," she said coolly, stepping past him. "It's been too long." Amber emerged from the kitchen, her smile brittle. "Rebecca, what a wonderful surprise." I shuffled out slowly, playing my role one last time. "Rebecca? Is that you, dear?" Her eyes widened slightly at my performance, but she recovered quickly, embracing me. "Mom, I've missed you." For the first 2 days, Thomas and Amber performed their roles as devoted caretakers perfectly. But Rebecca, an architect trained to notice details, began seeing the cracks in their facade. My possessions missing from common areas, Amber's constant interruptions when I spoke, the tension in Noah's small body when voices were raised. On the 3rd day, when Thomas and Amber took Noah to a school meeting, I finally revealed everything to Rebecca with Judith present as witness. I showed her the documents, recordings, and financial evidence. "I should have known," Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I trusted Thomas because it was easier, because I didn't want to face this house without Dad. They counted on your absence, just as they counted on my frailty," I replied. Rebecca immediately contacted Pastor Johnson, who'd baptized both my children and known our family for decades. He confirmed noticing my gradual removal from the church community, always explained away by Thomas as my health limitations. We gathered that evening in my bedroom, Rebecca, Judith, and Pastor Johnson, finalizing our strategy. Victoria suggests Sunday, Rebecca said, a family gathering where they can't refuse without looking suspicious. I'll bring Eleanor and Susan, Pastor Johnson offered. Thomas won't question the pastor and his wife visiting. I've invited Dr. Patel to check on you as well, Judith added. Victoria will come as my guest. That night, as the house slept, I crept to Thomas's office with the key I'd kept hidden. I needed one final piece of evidence, confirmation of the care facility arrangements. In his email, I found it. Correspondence with Sunrise Valley Assisted Living, including a partially completed admission form with my name. The projected move-in date, 3 weeks away. My hands shook as I photographed the screen, not from fear this time, but from a cold, clarifying anger. This was my son, the boy I'd nursed through childhood illnesses, helped through college applications, stood beside at his wedding. Now, he was planning to institutionalize me against my will to claim my house. As I quietly closed the office door, Noah appeared in the hallway, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Grandma, what are you doing up?" I knelt slowly, wincing at my arthritic knees. "Just getting some water, sweetheart. What about you?" "I had a bad dream," he whispered, "about you going away." I hugged him close, his small body warm against mine. "Sometimes dreams seem very real," I said carefully. "But remember, Noah, I will always love you, no matter what happens." He nodded against my shoulder. "I heard Dad say you're confused, but you don't seem confused to me." "Out of the mouths of babes indeed. Our little secret?" I whispered. He nodded solemnly. "Our secret." As I tucked him back into bed, I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Noah too, to show him that even the oldest, seemingly weakest person deserves dignity and respect. In 3 days, everything would change. I just had to maintain my performance a little longer. Sunday arrived bright and clear. I'd suggested a family lunch to celebrate Rebecca's visit, a reasonable request Thomas couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. As I set the table with shaking hands, I thought about how much had changed in 5 months. The woman whose face had been spit on would never have orchestrated what was about to happen. "Mom, let me help," Rebecca said, taking plates from my hands. She whispered, "Victoria just texted. Everything's ready." Thomas entered the kitchen, eyeing us suspiciously. "What are you two whispering about?" "Just telling Mom how nice she looks today," Rebecca replied smoothly. Thomas frowned. "You've invited quite a crowd, Mom. Is that wise with your condition?" "Just a few friends," I said, playing my role one last time. "It's been so long since I've seen anyone." "Because you get overtired," Amber interjected, entering with Noah. "We're just concerned about your health." Rebecca's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. We'd agreed to wait until everyone arrived. The doorbell rang at noon precisely. Judith entered with Victoria, introducing her as my friend from book club. Pastor Johnson and his wife Susan arrived minutes later, followed by Dr. Patel and Eleanor. Thomas pulled me aside, his voice low. "Mom, this is too much excitement. You should rest." "After lunch, dear," I said mildly. "I've been looking forward to this." The meal progressed with surface pleasantries. Amber became increasingly tense as conversation flowed around her, clearly uncomfortable with so many witnesses to her usual behavior. When dessert was served, I nodded slightly to Victoria, who placed her napkin on the table. Our signal. "I'd like everyone's attention," I announced, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "I've recently learned I need to make some important decisions about my home and future, and I'd value your input." Thomas's fork clattered against his plate. "Mom, you're confused again. We've discussed this." "Actually, Thomas," Victoria interrupted, standing to address the table, "your mother is perfectly lucid." "Who exactly are you?" Amber demanded. Victoria smiled coolly. "Victoria Chen, elder law attorney." She distributed folders to everyone present. "These contain documentation your mother has gathered over the past 5 months. The folders contained bank statements showing systematic diversion of my funds, a recent neurological evaluation confirming my mental competence, documentation of my downtown property ownership, transcripts of recorded conversations where Thomas and Amber discussed getting rid of the old lady, Doctor. Patel's report confirming that while I had chronic conditions, I was capable of independent living with appropriate support. Thomas went pale. Amber's face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous," she spluttered. "She's manipulating all of you. Everything we've done has been for her own good." "Including planning to institutionalize me without my consent?" I asked quietly. "Including stealing the income from the downtown property Edward left me? Including isolating me from my friends and church?" Noah looked between us, confusion on his small face. "You don't understand what it's been like," Thomas said desperately. "Her health, her confusion." "I understand perfectly, Doctor," Patel interjected. "I've been Martha's physician for 15 years. She has a heart condition that's well managed with medication. She shows no signs of cognitive impairment." Pastor Johnson spoke next. "We've all noticed Martha's absence from the community. Thomas, each time we called, you said she was too unwell for visitors." "Because she was," Amber shouted. Rebecca stood, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You controlled every aspect of her life. You took her home, her money, her independence, all while planning to discard her." The officer of justice, who had been quietly present as Victoria's assistant, stepped forward and handed Thomas and Amber legal papers. "This is a preliminary notification regarding charges of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and isolation," Victoria explained calmly. "The court has already granted an emergency order restoring Martha's control over her finances and property." I looked directly at my son, seeing the calculating man rather than the boy I'd raised. "This house remains mine, as it always has been," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You have 5 days to find other accommodations. Rebecca will stay with me while we resolve this situation." Thomas stared at me with disbelief that transformed into something darker, recognition that the frail, confused mother he'd manipulated was gone, replaced by the woman who had raised him, a woman who had finally found her voice again. The 5 days following Sunday's confrontation were tense beyond words. Thomas oscillated between desperate apologies and defensive justifications. "We were only trying to protect you. You didn't understand how to manage things anymore." Amber abandoned any pretense of affection, making veiled threats about Noah. "He's our son. We decide who sees him and who doesn't." They began packing, but slowly, provocatively, as if expecting me to relent. They used Noah as emotional leverage, whispering that "Grandma is kicking us out." I found moments alone with my grandson to explain in age-appropriate terms that he would always be welcome in my home. On the 4th day, Thomas made one final desperate attempt. He called the police, claiming concern about my mental health. When officers arrived, they found me calmly seated with Rebecca, Victoria, Dr. Patel, and Pastor Johnson, all prepared with legal and medical documentation. Sergeant Wilson, after reviewing the situation, pulled his younger colleague aside and explained, "Classic role reversal attempt in elder abuse cases. We see this pattern often." Realizing his last gambit had failed, Thomas finally completed the move on the 5th day. They rented an apartment across town, taking Noah with them. My grandson cried as he hugged me goodbye, but I reassured him, "Grandma will always be here for you, sweetheart. That will never change." As Thomas loaded the final boxes, he paused on the porch. "I really thought I was doing what was best," he said, not meeting my eyes. "For whom?" I asked simply. He had no answer. That evening, as Rebecca and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, she asked, "Do you think they'll ever understand what they did?" "Understanding and remorse are different paths," I replied. "I can't control which one Thomas chooses." The work was far from over. Victoria filed court proceedings to recover the funds Thomas had diverted. The banker who'd helped us found evidence that Thomas had falsified my signature on multiple documents. My downtown property required significant repairs after years of neglect. In the weeks that followed, I reclaimed my home inch by inch. My paintings returned to the walls. My books emerged from storage. I slept in my own bedroom again, surrounded by memories of Edward. Rebecca stayed for a month, working remotely to help restore order. We rebuilt our relationship in the process, healing wounds that predated Thomas's betrayal. She found a small rental nearby and began dividing her time between California and Massachusetts. The legal process moved slowly but steadily. Thomas was required to attend counseling and financial management classes. The criminal charges were conditionally suspended at my request, not for his sake, but for Noah's. Financial restitution was ordered, to be paid in monthly installments. Amber, unable to adjust to their reduced circumstances and public humiliation, eventually filed for divorce and moved to another state, leaving Thomas with primary custody of Noah, an unexpected blessing that allowed for careful rebuilding of relationships. The court established a visitation schedule allowing Noah to spend 1 weekend monthly with me. Thomas, after genuine therapy, began slowly acknowledging the gravity of his actions. Our relationship remained fragile, guarded, but not entirely destroyed. 6 months after the confrontation, I sat in Dr. Patel's office for a regular checkup. "Your blood pressure is better than it's been in years," he remarked, reviewing my chart. "Fighting back is good medicine, it seems," I replied with a small smile. "You've become something of an inspiration, Martha," he said. "I've referred 2 other patients to Victoria after noticing similar patterns in their lives." That evening, Eleanor called with a proposal. "The community center wants to start a support group for vulnerable seniors. Would you consider sharing your experience?" I thought about the past year, the humiliation, the fear, the slow rebuilding of my life and dignity. "Yes," I said finally. "If it helps even one person find their voice again, it's worth it." That night, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, the master bedroom that was mine again. The woman who looked back at me was changed, still old, still bearing the lines of grief and struggle, but standing straight, eyes clear, a survivor. Thomas had taken nearly 3 years of my life, but in fighting to reclaim what was mine, I'd found a strength I never knew I possessed, and perhaps most importantly, I'd discovered that even at 78, it wasn't too late for a new beginning. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after the confrontation, I stood in the community center addressing 20 seniors, their faces reflecting varying degrees of recognition and disbelief as I shared my story. "Elder abuse thrives in silence," I concluded. "Our generation was taught not to air family problems publicly, but silence protects the abusers, not the abused." The applause was warm, but more meaningful were the 3 people who approached afterward, quietly asking for Victoria's contact information. 3 more who might escape what I had endured. Eleanor joined me for lunch afterward. "You found your calling," she observed. "You're changing lives." "At 79, I laughed. Who would have thought? The downtown apartment Edward had purchased decades ago was finally renovated and rented to a young teacher, the rent now properly deposited into my account. The financial restitution from Thomas had funded necessary adaptations to my home: handrails, a stair lift, bathroom modifications that acknowledged my physical limitations without compromising my independence. Rebecca hadn't returned permanently to California, instead establishing a satellite office of her architecture firm in Boston. She purchased a small house 10 minutes from mine, close enough for regular visits without either of us feeling smothered. Thomas's legal consequences had been painful but necessary. The court ordered community service, mandatory counseling, and financial restitution. The criminal charges for elder abuse remained conditionally suspended, a clemency I'd requested not for him, but for Noah's sake. Amber, unwilling to adjust to their reduced circumstances, eventually filed for divorce and relocated to Arizona, leaving Thomas with primary custody of Noah. This unexpected development created space for healing between 3 generations of our family. The court established a visitation schedule, allowing Noah to spend 1 weekend monthly with me. These visits became precious to both of us, a time free from the tension that still lingered between Thomas and me. Thomas, after months of genuine therapy, began slowly acknowledging the gravity of his actions. Our relationship remained cautious, measured, but not irreparable. His monthly letters, part of his therapeutic process, chronicled his gradual recognition of the harm he'd caused. That afternoon, I hosted the church quilting circle, something I hadn't done since before my heart attack. Judith helped arrange chairs while I prepared refreshments, moving comfortably through my reclaimed kitchen. "Martha looks 10 years younger," I overheard one woman whisper to another. Perhaps I did. Freedom has that effect. As the afternoon light streamed through windows now free of Amber's heavy drapes, Pastor Johnson's wife Susan asked me to share my story at their regional church conference. "So many seniors in our congregations are suffering silently," she explained. "Your voice could make a difference." I agreed without hesitation. The woman who had once cleaned spit from her face now stood before audiences regularly, her story helping others find courage. Later that evening, I sat with Victoria on my porch, reviewing the progress of 2 cases she'd taken on after meeting clients through our senior support group. "You've become our best referral source," she said, smiling. "The Martha effect, we call it at the office. The irony," I replied, "is that none of this would have happened if Thomas and Amber hadn't pushed me so far." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Adversity reveals character, yours and theirs." Noah was visiting that weekend. As I tucked him in that night, in the room that had been Thomas's childhood bedroom, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Grandma, are you still mad at Dad?" I considered my answer carefully. "I'm disappointed in his choices, Noah, but I still love him because he's my son, just like he still loves you even when you make mistakes." "He seems sad a lot," Noah observed. "Growing up is hard at any age," I replied. "Sometimes the hardest lessons come when we're already adults." The next morning, I watched from the kitchen window as Thomas arrived to pick up Noah. He remained on the porch, respecting the boundaries Victoria had established. Our interactions were civil, carefully choreographed, neither of us fully trusting the other yet. But as Noah ran to his father, I saw Thomas kneel to embrace him, a gesture of affection I hadn't witnessed before the divorce. Perhaps losing so much had taught him to value what remained. That afternoon, I attended a community board meeting where I'd recently been appointed to the Senior Services Committee. My voice, once silenced in my own home, now helped shape policies affecting hundreds of elderly residents. Walking home, I passed the park where Edward and I had taken our children decades ago. A sense of peace settled over me, not the passive acceptance I'd mistaken for peace during those years of abuse, but the genuine tranquility that comes from standing in your truth. At 79, I had reclaimed not just my home and finances, but my voice, my dignity, and the possibility of authentic family relationships, imperfect, scarred, but finally honest. The last act of my life had become, unexpectedly, my most powerful. "You look good, Mom." Thomas stood awkwardly on my porch, 18 months after moving out. This wasn't our usual custody exchange. Noah was at school. Thomas had requested this meeting, a first. "Thank you," I replied, not inviting him in. We still conducted our conversations on the porch or in neutral locations, a boundary I maintained despite his progress in therapy. "I've completed the financial management course," he said, hands in his pockets, "and the restitution payments are on schedule." "Victoria mentioned that," I acknowledged. Silence stretched between us, mother and son, connected by blood and history, but separated by betrayal. "I've been trying to understand why I did what I did," he finally said, his voice strained. "The therapist says it was about control, about resenting you and Dad for always being so competent. Then when you got sick, I saw an opportunity to finally be in charge." He looked away. "That sounds horrible when I say it aloud." "It was horrible to live through," I replied simply. "I know." He swallowed hard. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I understand what I did now. Really understand." I studied his face, the boy I'd raised, the man who'd betrayed me, perhaps now someone trying to rebuild himself into someone better. "Understanding is the beginning," I said finally. "What matters is what you do with that understanding." He nodded, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Noah asked if you would come to his school play next week. I'd like you to be there too." A small olive branch, not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but a tentative step forward. "I'll be there," I promised. 2 years after that Sunday confrontation, my life had transformed completely. My house was fully mine again, adapted for my needs without compromising my independence. The restored income from Edward's investments and the downtown property ensured my financial security. Rebecca had permanently relocated her architecture practice to Boston, specializing in accessible design for seniors, inspired by the modifications to my home. Our relationship, once strained by distance and misunderstanding, had deepened into friendship as well as family. The senior support group Eleanor and I started now met weekly at the community center, with Victoria offering monthly legal consultations. 3 cases of financial elder abuse had been successfully prosecuted as a direct result of seniors finding courage through our program. Noah spent every other weekend with me, time filled with baking, gardening, and stories about Edward that Thomas had never shared. At 10, he was growing into a thoughtful boy with his grandfather's kind eyes. My health had stabilized, the stress-induced spikes in blood pressure now rare. Dr. Patel joked that fighting back had been the best medicine he never prescribed. That evening, as I prepared for Noah's school play, I caught sight of myself in the bedroom mirror. The woman reflected there bore little resemblance to the defeated shell who had wiped spit from her face 3 years earlier. My posture was straight despite my arthritis. My eyes were clear and direct. Even my voice had changed, lower, steadier, no longer seeking permission to exist. At the elementary school, I sat beside Thomas in the auditorium, a careful foot of space between us. When Noah spotted us from the stage during his performance, his face lit with genuine joy at seeing his father and grandmother sitting together, if not exactly united. After the play, as Noah proudly showed us his costume, a passing teacher asked, "Is this your grandmother, Noah?" "This is my Grandma Martha," he announced with importance. "She teaches people to stand up for themselves." Thomas looked away, but not before I caught the complex emotion on his face, shame mixed with a father's pride in his son's moral clarity. Later that week, I received a letter from Amber, the first communication since her departure. She was remarried in Arizona, expecting a child, and wanted to relinquish all claims to visitation with Noah. Her letter included no apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just practical matters requiring my signature as a concerned party in the custody arrangement. I signed the papers without comment. Some chapters were better closed permanently. That Sunday, as I sat in my reclaimed pew at church, Pastor Johnson's sermon touched on forgiveness, not the easy greeting card version, but the complex, ongoing process that acknowledges harm while creating space for change. Afterward, Judith joined me for our weekly lunch. "Thomas seems different," she observed cautiously. "He is," I acknowledged. "Whether it's enough remains to be seen." My pacemaker regulated my physical heart, but I discovered that the heart's emotional capacity for trust, once shattered, healed much more slowly. Not everything broken could be perfectly restored. Yet as I looked around my dining room, at the walls now adorned again with my paintings, the shelves filled with my books, the garden visible through windows no longer hidden by Amber's heavy drapes, I felt a profound gratitude, not just for what I'd recovered, but for what I'd discovered in myself. At 80, I had become not just a survivor, but an advocate. The final chapter of my life had revealed a strength I never knew I possessed, a strength now helping others find their voices. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.